Let's talk about the Space Marine Priest with the jet black power armor, leading the chapter to glory from the front lines. Time to talk through every single Space Marine Chaplain in Warhammer 40K. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Space Marines once more, and in this video I thought we'd go through each and every chaplain in the game, roughly what they do, and how strong I think they are right now. Space Marine Chaplains are of course the warrior priests and spiritual leaders of the chapter. They have one of the most notable leadership roles in most normal chapter construction, and typical Codex chapters will have them stride at the front of the battle, equipped in armour with their signature black plate, and usually bearing a skull mask on their helm. They'll chant prayers and inspiring battle cries from the chapter's overall faith and mythology, and when they do their job well, they inspire great feats of bravery amongst their brother Marines. There's a lot of variation out there in the galaxy though, many chapters do things differently, from the Wolf Priest to the Space Wolves that also comprise the Apothecary type rule, to the Blood Angels Death Company chaplains, guiding the lost cursed by the Black Rage to a glorious death. In general, in 10th edition, chaplains on the board typically give you a +1 to wound boost in melee. A few of the unique chaplains do slightly different things, but that's the theme for the majority of the standard ones. Really quite a solid melee boost, that, particularly given a lot of Space Marine melee attacks tend to be sort of mid-strength, though it does mean that chaplains in general tend to be a character that want to actually accompany a melee unit into the fight, as opposed to inspiring ranged units, which might have been a bit more case in the past when they had more flexibility over their litanies they could chant. Otherwise, they grant a 5+ leadership to the unit, not too bad for resisting battle shock a bit, and fight with their signature badges of office, the Rosarius giving them a 4+ invulnerable save, and the Crozius Arcanum usually is an attack with 5 attacks at strength 6 and damage 2. They hit on a 2+ in close combat and tend to be a bit fightier compared with say the Librarians out there. In any case, let's go through each chaplain in the game right now and give them an overall Rosarius ranking out of 5 for their competitiveness right now. How strong are they on the battlefield? Jumping straight in then, and first up we have the standard chaplain, previously known as the Primaris Chaplain. He's 60 points, so is the very cheapest out of any of the options here, and he's perhaps got the single biggest choice of squads he can lead, basically anything that's standard Space Marine size and normal power armour. Though given that Chaplin's main boost is the +1 to wound in melee, you're probably going to be looking at the Blade Guard Veteran squad as the first choice, maybe Assault Intercessors as an alternative. The rest are just generally better at range than melee. For his own profile, he's got 4 wounds with the 4+ invulnerable save from that Rosarius. Shoots with an Absolver Bolt Pistol, which is a big strength 5 and damage 2, could be good for offing a Space Marine in the right circumstances. And his Crozius Arcanum hits with 5 attacks at weapon skill 2+, strength 6, AP 1 and damage 2. Again, nice enough for stacking some saves, though the AP is maybe a little bit on the low side. That should still be good for killing a Space Marine or 2 per round that he fights though. The standard one gives his squad 3 basic things, a leadership of 5+, the +1 to wound in melee, and he also has a rule to allow you to cancel battle shock for 1 unit within 12 inches once per game. That one might be a slightly opportunistic one, but given that it's at least fairly long range at 12 inches, there's at least a reasonable chance that that could come in use from time to time, or maybe even stop you having to use an insane bravery check. The main draw to this guy though is definitely that cheap +1 to wound, particularly for the Blade Guard it seems the most relevant there, given that they've got a whole bunch of mid-strength attacks at strength 5. It really does make a lot of difference with them punching up against tougher stuff. For example, a squad of 6 Blade Guard with their strength of 5 would do around about 4 wounds to a toughness 10 3+ save vehicle on average, due to them only wounding on a 6+. For the extra 60 point investment on a squad that cost 180 points before, you add both the Chaplain's melee profile plus the +1 to wound, and between all that you get basically over double damage against those kind of targets, going up to a big 9 wounds in 1 round of combat overall there. Perhaps the biggest downside though is that he's competing with the Primaris Lieutenant, who gives you some very similar numbers with his lethal hits buff, and in general he does tend to be the one that gets taken a little bit more often than the Chaplain. Realistically though, for that kind of role they are fairly well even. The Chaplain is a tiny bit cheaper as well, which does help for him, but I guess the Lieutenant's buff, just skipping the wound roll step and not really caring about hit roll modifiers either, both are quite good things for their point of view. Overall I certainly don't think he's a bad choice though, and have chosen to rank him 3.5 Rosariuses out of 5. Next up we've got the bigger and beefier Chaplain in Terminator armour, 75 points for this guy. He can normally lead either the Terminator Assault Squad or the regular Terminator Squad, plus chapter specific variants. For only a 15 point upgrade on the regular Chaplain, he does bring quite a lot more stats to the table. Toughness 5, 5 wounds and a 2+ save is definitely a lot more durable. And in addition to his Crozius attacks, he basically gets the choice of either getting +1 wound with the Relic Shield to give him wound 6, or a Storm Bolter for a flurry of anti-light infantry shooting. Honestly, between the two, those do seem at least kind of balanced really. I don't think that either one's really going to change the world. Otherwise, he gets the same +1 to wound, which is rather nice for Terminators with Power Fist. They'll be wounding vehicles on a 5+, so getting that to a 4 is good. And his bonus rule is a 4+ save against mortal wounds. Again, rather nice to counter one powerful way to deal damage to Terminators with their big toughness and many layers of defense, though this did take a massive knock when the devastating wounds rule got changed to no longer be mortal wounds, and that was pretty much the single most common source of mortal wounds before. Still though, for 75 points, the +1 to wound is really quite significant on basically any flavour of Terminator unit. And unlike the Blade Guard veterans on foot, there's no competition here from an equally cheap source of lethal hits to help them punch up, at least not outside of things like Dark Angel Strike Masters or Space Wolves Battle Leaders. I guess if you just want more damage out of your Terminator squad, the main competition is the Terminator Librarian with the sustained hits. He helps out range shooting as well as melee, but will be significantly worse if you're ever wounding on a 5+, say if your Terminator squad's fighting with an enemy monster or vehicle. Again, the damage output boost really is quite good for those kind of targets. For 5 Terminators with a Power Fist loadout, you do around about 4 or 5 wounds to a 3+ save vehicle. Going with this Chaplain as well, including his damage for the extra 75 points, that goes up to 8 or 9 wounds, definitely makes them a lot more capable of handling tougher stuff. Overall, despite the mortal wounds change, I still think he's fairly well worth it. I've chosen to rank him a 4 out of 5 overall. Next up, we've got Faith on Wheels with the Chaplain on bike, a 75-point model that can lead the Outrider squad, and he basically has a profile that reflects his extra Outrider bike. 5 wounds at toughness 5 with a 12-inch move and the mounted keyword, and the 4+ invulnerable as standard by the Rosarius. He's got the similar sort of Chaplain melee profile with that Crozius, and also comes with a twin bolt rifle for a little bit more long-range shooting. Otherwise, he's got the standard +1 to wound litany, and then his second litany is the Catechism of Fire. If you target a unit with your shooting attacks within 12 inches, then the ranged attacks gain devastating wounds. Kind of interesting enough for the Outriders bolt rifles, I suppose. Realistically, putting all that together though, I think perhaps the biggest limitation is that he is forced to lead Outriders only outside of certain other chapters like, say, Dark Angels or Deathwatch. Unfortunately, Outriders at the moment just aren't really very strong right now, and even giving them +1 to wound on their flurries of chainsaw attacks is only going to make them punch up kind of normally against more armoured infantry targets, never mind vehicles and things. The devastating wounds thing on the shooting is kind of fun, but it does mean that their target's a bit more limited if they actually want to activate that rather than having kind of good range. And even then, even if you're maximally fishing for devastating wounds on a big unit, you're still probably only going to get 1 or 2 devastating wounds per turn, so it's not like you're getting loads of things automatically through armor saves. Overall, might be a little bit more interesting in Dark Angel's Black Knights, and pretty much going to be taken if you are playing the Stormlance force, where you're forced to build around Outriders pretty much outside of Space Wolves. But in general, I think that this guy's kind of limited by the strength of the Outriders in the first place, and for that reason I've chosen to rank him a 1.5 out of 5 overall. Next up, we've got the Chaplain with Jump Pack, one of the last Firstborn characters surviving in the standard Space Marine Codex. He gets to either lead the Assault Intercessors with Jump Packs or the Vanguard Veterans with Jump Packs, costs 75 points, and he basically has the profile of the standard Chaplain but with Fly, and gets quite a big variety of choices in his offhand that isn't holding the Crozius. I think probably the most sensible one to choose from is to perhaps take the Power Fist in that other hand, giving him the option to trade his 5 Crozius attacks for 4 Power Fist attacks with Strength 8, AP 2 and Damage 2 whenever it makes sense. Though otherwise you could definitely get a fancy pistol like the Inferno pistol like the official model has. As always, he gives the +1 to wound for the squad that he's led, and then beyond that his second rule is another damage dealing rule. Maybe not loads, but basically a chance to deal some mortal wounds when you're fighting. Roll a dice and on a 4 to 5 the enemy takes D3 mortal wounds, and on a 6 they take 3. Pretty much a coin flip chance at a little bit of extra damage, and doesn't really seem like the worst extra value add. Again, I feel this guy might be just a little bit limited by the units that he can choose to join. The Vanguard Veterans will be hitting with only Strength 5 and AP 1 attacks. Again, like the Outriders, even with the +1 to wound going on that, they might still struggle with heavy stuff. But I feel like maybe the Jump Intercessors at least help with that a little bit, at least given that they have mortal wound impact hits, and then also get a Power Fist in the unit, which is quite nice with his boosts. With 10 of them, then you'd get 245 points with this Chaplain. Big mortal wound hits on the charge, and then even after that you'd average around about 7 dead Space Marines, or around about 9 wounds to a 3+ save vehicle. Perhaps doesn't seem to be too bad for how fast they are and being at least somewhat cheap. Most of the time people do tend to be a little bit more tempted by them in small interference units though, rather than ranked up, and he'd be competing with the jump pack captain for that. 3 stratagems plus a fighty character is also really quite a nice bet. Overall I think he's usable though. I've chosen to rank him 2.5 out of 5. Could be another interesting one for Blood Angels competing against their regular chaplains. Getting into chapter specific stuff though, and starting out we've got the Black Templars. Chaplain Grimaldus is 95 points, and he can lead the Primaris Crusader squad, as well as Sword Brethren and Intercessor Flavors and Infernus Marines. His base profile is similar to standard chaplains, but gets a 5+ Feel No Pain type save, so it's going to be tougher than most, and he does come with a little retinue of 3 servitors, all of which still get his 4+ Invulnerable save as well. And that can add perhaps a surprising amount of durability to the unit. They don't have the character keyword, so you could tank the first 2 really big hits on standard servitors, maybe eating a Meltagun or Las Cannon shot that might have fried a Space Marine otherwise, or even just ping that off their invulnerable saves. You do need to make sure you keep at least one of them alive though for his buffs. Otherwise he's alright in combat, with the Artificer Crozius giving him AP -2, a bit better than most there, plus a plasma pistol, and he gives his squad a nice reroll all hits in melee. Generally a strong damage boost there, plus your choice of either 5+ Feel No Pain, extra AP in melee, or Advance and Charge, all of which are pretty powerful. Perhaps the most common and easy way to use him would just be a 5+ Feel No Pain type save in a 20 strong Crusader squad. That's going to add a lot of durability and might to the unit. They'll hit far harder in combat with him around, and then you could flex into either Advance and Charge or extra AP if it just happened to make sense on any given turn more than the durability. Combine that with a good melee profile and handy servitors, and he basically seems pretty much auto-include if you're running any sort of Foot Horde style Black Templars. Overall I think he's very competitive, and I'd rate him a 5 out of 5. Blood Angels next, and here we have Chaplain Lemartes, 110 points, and acting as the Guardian of the Lost, he leads Death Company into battle with the jump packs. He acts as a 4-wound jump chaplain with a 6+ Feel No Pain type save, and hits even harder in combat than Grimaldus does normally, with the Blood Crozius with 5 attacks with AP -2, but also gets lethal hits built in as well. He will usually be able to reroll hit rolls anyway due to the Death Company special rule, and that's genuinely very powerful to fish for 6s to auto wound if he does happen to be wounding something on a 5+ or worse. Then for his actual buffing rules, they really are very strong. He grants lethal hits to the melee in his unit, and on the defensive he makes Death Company tougher as well, with -1 damage for them. Between that and their 6+ Feel No Pain, it can make them just unusually tanky to both damage 2 and even damage 3 firepower, the sort of thing that should just easily go through Space Marines, no questions asked. Despite being the single most pricey single character chaplain, I do think that Lemartes has really quite big value. Both his buffs just seem to be spectacularly useful for Death Company, and his own personal fighting abilities aren't bad either. For example, if you had him leading a big unit of Death Company with Power Fist with his lethal hits, their 4 hit rerolls just make that spectacularly efficient. You average around about 22 wounds to a 3+ save vehicle with that unit, never mind anything lighter that the Power Fist would wound a bit better anyway, and that'd get even more deadly if you were in the Blood Angels detachment getting an extra attack on the charge. The -1 damage is pretty excellent against the exact firepower that most wants to target the Death Company Marines as well, and the Chaplain presence is pretty handy just for Death Company in general, allowing them to have their objective control 1 and not go down to 0, and allowing them to fall back for a bit more flexibility. Overall for Blood Angels in particular, I'd rank him the 4-5 out of 5 on the Rosaria scale, though maybe caveat that slightly with the fact that Blood Angels are kind of struggling a bit at the moment just as a faction. It does mean he's maybe in the position of being perhaps one of the best options, but for an army that's struggling in game a fair bit, so take that how you will. That's not all for the Blood Angels though, as we also have the Grim Executioner that is Astorath, 85 points for the Blood Angels Chaplain that will put you out of your misery if you go a bit too nuts with the Black Rage. Again, he leads the Death Company with jump packs, and he fights with the Executioner's axe with 4 attacks at Strength 6, AP 3, Damage 2, and also devastating wounds. Otherwise, he's a little bit tankier than Lemartes is, getting a 2+ save and a big 5 wounds rather than 4. They would perhaps argue that the buffs that he gives the unit aren't quite as useful. A 4+ chance for the models to fight in death, not awful, but also not maybe quite as spectacular as damage output that they get just as an extra. And once per game he can use his Massive Doom, giving the unit devastating wounds on the charge, potentially quite powerful to punch through some high armor or invulnerable saves. Overall, despite the points difference, I would rate Astorath as perhaps the second choice chaplain for Death Company leading for the Blood Angels. Both the damage boosts are nice enough, devastating wounds is good, and fighting on death can be pretty handy if you're fighting against enemy melee units that want to charge and destroy the Death Company. though I feel like beyond his upgraded profile he's just maybe not enormously more exciting than the standard +1 to wound jump chaplain that you can get. If you just wanted something to amp up Death Company hitting power, then that one could be a better choice potentially. Still pretty solid though. I do quite like the AP3 on his axe. Overall I'd rank him a 3 out of 5 on the Rosaria scale. For the Space Wolves next we have Ulrik the Slayer, 70 points, so a nice cheap chaplain variant, or I suppose technically Wolf Priest if we're being picky. He can lead Bloodclaws, Grey Hunters, Long Fangs or Wolf Guard, so a bit more limited than most, and as per usual if we're going for the more melee focused things that's realistically going to be either Bloodclaws or Wolf Guard. For his stat line is fairly standard but gets a 6+ Feel No Pain type save, an AP-2 Artificer Crozius, and a Plasma Pistol for a little bit of shooting threat. The Wolf Helm of Russ interestingly gives him an aura of 5+ leadership, which is kind of uncommon as an ability, though how impactful it is maybe a bit more another question. I guess occasionally it might help a nearby unit pass battle shock when they might have failed. The big deal for this guy though is absolutely definitely his special rule. Slayer's Oath is a really interesting fight phase buff. You get to nominate one unit that's in engagement range of his unit in the fight phase, and if you're attacking that unit you get to reroll all hit rolls of 1 and all wound rolls of 1, really quite a nice boost, but then it's bumped up massively to 4 hit rerolls and then 4 wound rerolls full stop if you happen to be fighting a character, monster or vehicle, and that is going to comprise the most important targets that you might be fighting in the game. Those damage buffs range from strong from the standard version, which is usually going to be a 36% damage output on that target unit, to the big version, which is effectively kind of equivalent to old style Oath of Moment, usually around about double damage that you might have been getting previously. I think the most tempting thing that I'd be wanting to use with him would probably be the Bloodclaws. They're literally just 14 points per model, so very cheap Space Marine bodies there. You could take loads, but if you just went for 10 of them, then that'd be 210 points for them plus Ulrik, which seems like quite a nice deal overall given that you get a character in there. On the charge they get +1 strength and +1 attack, and with their 9 chainswords plus a power fist on the pack leader, you'd average around about 10 enemy Space Marines slain, or around about 11 wounds to a toughness 12 3+ save vehicle, both of which are just kind of ludicrous numbers for a 200 point unit of any sort, let alone one that's at least fairly durable and has high objective control, but is efficient enough to drag down some tanks with chainswords. Overall I feel like such a unit is definitely a credible option for the Space Wolves, loads of melee potential there, and have chosen to rank him a 4 out of 5 on the Rosaria scale. Maybe the main issues are just how many good characters he's got to compete with the Space Wolves, and he can't access entire units of damage 2 weapons like Blade Guard, which would take him to the next level. For their bitter rivals, the Dark Angels, we have none other than Chaplain Asmodai, who will certainly be trying to make the enemies repent. Like Ezekiel, as I talked about in the Librarian video, he desperately needs his leader type rule updating. Currently the only non-Legends choice that's listed on his datasheet is the Tactical Squad, so he's kind of waiting on the Codex Space Marine FAQ to have the leader choices updated and changed around. Otherwise though, he's basically a 4 wound chaplain with a standard Crozius with the AP-1. He kind of gets 3 extras, one the Blades of Reason, which are an extra 3 attacks in combat with strength 4, AP0 and damage 1, but they do get anti-character 2+ and precision. He trades out the +1 to wound for reroll hit rolls, and then he's got a couple of anti-character rules, triggering battle shock for characters in your fight phase, and if he does manage to destroy an enemy character model, then you gain 1 command point. Overall though, I feel like he doesn't really have the rules that really reflect his scary nature. Only being able to lead tactical marines is an absolute killer right from the get-go, never mind anything else. They're not really a unit that you're going to want to buff in melee. The damage boost is okay, but really not that much better than the +1 to wound. I think I'll be a bit more tempted by that for things like Assault Intercessors or Blade Guard, even if he could use them anyway. And the anti-character rules just don't really add up to all that much. It's not realistically going to kill any one character with those Blades of Reason. Damage 1 and AP0 just aren't going to make that happen most of the time, and that means it's kind of unlikely to trigger the command point thing, and Battle Shock in your own fight phase just isn't that useful. Overall, between all that, I've chosen to rate him just 1 out of 5 on the Rosaria scale. Next up for the Death Watch, the Ultramarines version of Chaplain Cassius might be Legends now, but he can still be fielded during his long vigil, leading a squad of composite veterans with the Kill Team Cassius formation. The overall unit is 255 points, so a bit different to the rest of the options on the list here, and it comprises of Cassius, who's got a fairly standard looking chaplain profile, plus 10 other models in the unit, including a Terminator and a Biker. To consider him here, obviously you have to weigh up the entire unit and how useful they're going to be. They are a bit of a weird mixed bag of a unit with different profiles, packing things like a heavy flamer, a frag cannon, and a psychic attack from the mini librarian within the unit. And then just a whole mix of profiles to back that up in close combat, some power fists, some lightning claws, a force weapon and more. Chaplain Cassius gets the standard style chaplain attacks, 5 attacks at strength 6, AP 1 and damage 2, and they all get devastating wounds due to his Catechism of Death special rule. Otherwise, he also grants the entire unit leadership 5 and gets to reroll some fails on battle shock. It does make them one of the most reliable anti-battle shock units in the game there. And the librarian contributes his psychic hood, meaning that they have a 4+ feel no pain against psychic attacks. Overall, I think the unit is really quite a fun one, with a massive mix of gear and some very nice sculpted models, really good to emphasise what the Death Watch is supposed to be. But like in previous editions, it's had the issue of just not really doing any one thing all that well. Sort of medium shooting with medium melee. Maybe could be handy enough to scrap over some midfield points, though I think realistically it either needs a greater discount for the entire squad put together, or something a bit more truly game changing in terms of their special rules. As it stands, they're just kind of a squad that fights okay and shoots okay, and maybe doesn't really have any massive overall battle plan. And if that's going to be the case, I suspect they just need to be a bit cheaper than this overall to really get a look in versus the tailored kill teams that you can build exactly how you like. For that reason, I've chosen to give them a 1.5 out of 5 on the Rosaria scale. Finally, we come to the Grey Knights with their Brotherhood Chaplain, 75 points, and can lead either Terminators or Paladins. Broadly, this guy is really quite similar to the standard Terminator Chaplain. He's got the same profile, barring that he can't take the Relic Shield, he just has to take the Storm Bolter there. He gets the same +1 to wound in combat to amp up your force weapons there. And the one major difference on his datasheet compared with the standard Space Marine one is the Dread Warding aura that he gets. He trades the Mortal Wound Protection for his units for a Battle Shock debuff. Enemies within 6 inches have a -1 to test. Overall for this guy, I really wouldn't rate the Battle Shock debuff as doing much at all. The main reason that you want him here is for the +1 to wound, and I think that is at least reasonable enough for Grey Knights out there. One of their biggest weaknesses is only wounding vehicles on a 5+ or 6+, so anything that you can do to improve that is going to be welcome for them. It's definitely not the most unhelpful in the world, though I feel like he faces just some very stiff competition from the other Terminator characters out there. Grey Knights have a lot of options, and a lot of which are kind of viable with the Terminators. I feel like maybe Caldor Draco himself or the Terminator Librarians might be some of the most popular ones. Either just enormous melee and easy charges, or some devastating mortal wounds from longer range, and plenty of the other options are very usable as well. Overall, I'd rank him kind of middling, a 3 out of 5 overall. And with the Grey Knights done, that perhaps concludes our quick tour around just about every chaplain in Warhammer 40k. Overall, here are my very rough rankings for how they stack up against each other. I'd probably rate some of the top ones as being Grimaldus, Lemartes, Ulrik, and the Terminator one for their respective armies. The standard one, Astorath, the Grey Knight one, and the Jump Pack one being sort of mid-tier, the Biker one maybe being a little bit held back by his Outrider charges at the moment, and then Asmodai and Kill Team Cassius being some of perhaps the weaker ones out there comparatively. Let me know your thoughts though, which of the chaplains have been performing well for you in game at the moment, and have they been seeing enough table time versus their rivals in the Space Marine HQ section. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, while I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to post new things just about every day, and I'm sure I'll have plenty more for the Space Marines. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support and keep them coming. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, an enormous thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.